I'm taking you straight into that moment that made every lawyer, every reporter, and every staffer in that courtroom pause for half a second. When the judge spoke the words, "This order is blocked," you could feel something shift. You could feel the weight of it. You could feel the message underneath it, even if Trump didn't want you to. I was watching this unfold and thought to myself, Lord, this is the first time in a long time someone has told him no and made it stick. Seniors watching this, you know that feeling. You know what it's like to see someone who's used to getting their way finally hit a wall they can't climb over. It doesn't just surprise them, it rattles them because it exposes the truth they've been avoiding. Their power isn't absolute, it never was. Before we go deeper, let me ask, where are you watching from? The US, Canada, the UK, Australia? Drop your country in the comments because I want to know how far this truth is reaching, especially today when clarity matters more than ever. Here's what happened. Trump issued an order involving the National Guard, an order that, according to legal experts, he had no constitutional ground to stand on. And this judge didn't dance around it, didn't water it down, didn't soften it. They said plainly that the president cannot command the Guard like his own personal army, not without cause, not without law, not without accountability. The second that ruling landed, I watched Trump's expression shift just slightly, but enough to tell the story. You know how someone's confidence slips for a split second before they recover it? That's what happened. You could see in his eyes that this wasn't the outcome he expected because he's used to bluster bending reality. He's used to pressure overriding process. He's used to people folding, but the court didn't fold. And that's why this moment mattered. This wasn't just a blocked order. This was the system saying you don't get to play with power like that. What I'm about to tell you next is why that ruling shook people far beyond that courtroom. Now let's talk about why Trump tried this. No, because this wasn't some random decision he scribbled on a napkin. This was intentional. This was calculated. And it reflects something he's been reaching for ever since he realized the courts, the Congress, and even some of his own allies no longer jump when he snaps his fingers. Trump has always had a fascination with using force as a symbol, a way to project strength even when the ground is cracking under him. Seniors watching this, I know you remember those moments. Portland, Lafayette Square, the governors who looked him straight in the eye and said, "No, you can't use our guard for that." Over and over, Trump tried to test the limits, and over the Constitution pushed him back. That pattern matters because people don't reach for dramatic displays of authority when they feel secure. They reach for them when they feel cornered, when they feel their grip slipping, when they're trying to send a message bigger than the moment. And I'll tell you this, it reminded me of something from my own childhood. I remember an uncle who would always try to raise his voice to regain control of a situation when he didn't actually have a solution. The louder he got, the more obvious it became that he was scared of losing respect. Power rooted in fear is unstable, it swings wild, it looks strong but breaks easy. That's exactly what this move from Trump felt like, an attempt to look bigger than the situation he was actually facing, because legally he knows presidents can't just activate the National Guard for political purposes. They can't treat state-controlled forces as props. There are rules, processes, checks, and he's been told this repeatedly by military leaders, by governors, by courts, but this time he tried anyway. And seniors understand why people push boundaries they've been told not to cross. It's not confidence, it's desperation dressed up as authority. And that's why this judge's decision matters so much, because someone finally said, this isn't about politics, this is about the law. What the judge saw in that order, the reasoning hidden inside it, is the part that should concern every American watching this. When that judge began reading the ruling, the entire room leaned forward. Not because anyone expected Trump to win, but because nobody expected the judge to be that direct. Judges usually wrap their decisions in pages of legal language, but this one spoke like someone who understood exactly how dangerous a loose grip on power can be. The judge said Trump's order had no legal foundation and posed a clear conflict with constitutional authority. And I promise you, those words landed heavier than he expected. You could almost hear the air tighten in the room. Even reporters set their pens down the way people do when they realize they're hearing something historic. What struck me wasn't just the language, it was the tone. Steady, calm, firm. The tone of someone saying, this cannot stand. Not out of politics, but out of duty. Seniors know that tone. You've heard it from school principals, from military commanders, from parents who finally reached their limit. It's the tone that draws a line in the sand. And I'll tell you what hit me hardest. The judge didn't just block Trump's order. He explained why he had to do it. He talked about the danger of a president overstepping when there's no real emergency. He pointed to the Constitution like a parent, pointing to a rule book that's already been ignored too many times. He said the quiet part out loud. If Trump could do this now without restraint, he could do a lot more later. I watched Trump out of the corner of my eye as the judge spoke. His jaw tightened, his posture stiffened. He blinked harder than usual, like he was processing something he didn't want to admit, because for the first time in a long time, someone with real authority told him no, and he couldn't talk his way out of it. And seniors, you know exactly what that look means. It's the look of someone realizing the limits of their power and realizing it in front of an audience. But the part of the ruling that truly chilled me, the part the public barely heard, was the warning hidden inside the judge's words, the warning about what Trump was trying to do underneath the surface, the warning that told me this wasn't just a legal block, it was a red flag. And that's what we need to talk about next. What really shook me wasn't the block itself, it was the warning the judge tucked inside the ruling. Judges don't usually warn presidents, they interpret the law, they apply the law, they don't announce red flags, but this judge did. And that alone tells you something was seriously off about Trump's order. The judge said the request suggested potential misuse of military authority, and when those words hit the air, you could feel the courtroom shift, because misuse of military power, that's not a small thing, that's not a legal technicality. That is the exact thing the Constitution was built to prevent. Seniors know this better than anyone. You lived through eras when military force was debated, when presidents were questioned, when the line between safety and control felt thin. You've seen countries fall into chaos because leaders thought they could use force to solve political problems. You understand why that boundary exists and why it has to hold. And here's where the judge's warning becomes chilling. He pointed out that Trump didn't offer clear grounds for federal involvement. No emergency, no threat, no constitutional justification, just an order that seemed designed to test how far he could push his authority. And that right there, that is what scared the judge, because people don't test boundaries unless they're hoping those boundaries will bend. I remember a moment years ago with a young man in Dallas who kept pushing past rules in a community program I helped run, not because he needed to, but because he wanted to know what would happen if he did. And I told him something I'll never forget. The danger isn't you breaking the rule, it's you learning you can. That's exactly the fear the judge was pointing to. This wasn't just an unlawful order. It was a test, a probe, a political experiment dressed up as a command. And the judge knew it. That's why he didn't just block the order. He wrote a warning into the record as if to say, we see what you're trying to do. And seniors, you know exactly what that means. You've watched enough history to understand that when a leader starts probing the edges of power, something deeper is going on beneath the surface. But what happened next in Trump's own circle confirmed that the judge's instincts were right. The moment that ruling hit, you could practically hear the panic ripple through Trump's inner circle. Not from what they said, but from what they didn't say. People started shifting in their seats, advisors whispering behind hands, staffers pulling out phones like they were checking notes, but really they were checking reactions. And seniors watching this, you know that type of silence. It's the silence that shows up right after someone gets caught doing something they thought they could get away with. One aide leaned into another, whispering fast, eyes wide. Another stepped out into the hallway, pacing like they were bracing for a blow, and every face told the same story. Trump had pushed too far, and the judge had called it out in a way none of them were ready for. And let me tell you the part that stuck with me most. They weren't panicking because the order failed. People in power lose cases all the time. They were panicking because the judge exposed the intent behind the order. And once intent is questioned, everything else Trump does gets examined through that same lens. It reminded me of something I witnessed years ago, long before Congress, when a neighborhood leader tried to settle a dispute by threatening to call in backup. He didn't have backup. He didn't even know what he meant. But the minute he said it, everyone realized he was desperate, not strong. That's when the community stopped trusting him, because when someone in authority reaches for force they shouldn't use, it tells you something about their state of mind. Trump's team felt that same shift. You could see it in the stiff posture, the forced smiles, the way some tried to get ahead of the story by saying, this is judicial activism. But none of them sounded convinced, not even to themselves. They know the courts, they know the Constitution, and they know the difference between a political setback and a legal rebuke with teeth. And seniors, you've seen this dynamic 1,000 times. A person who relies on intimidation suddenly gets checked and the people around them start scrambling, not because the situation is unclear, but because it's finally too clear. But if you think the staff looks shaken, wait until you hear how the governors responded, because their reaction told a whole different story. A story about power boundaries and what happens when the states decide they've had enough. While Trump's inner circle was scrambling, trying to spin the ruling, the governors, you know, the people who actually control the National Guard, responded in a completely different way. Not with panic, not with confusion, not with excuses. No, their response had a steadiness to it, a kind of quiet strength that told me they understood exactly what Trump was trying to do, and they weren't going to let it stand. Some of them released statements within hours reaffirming what seniors already know. The National Guard does not belong to any one president. It belongs to the states. It belongs to the Constitution. It belongs to the checks and balances that keep this country from sliding into a place where one man decides who gets force used against them. And what struck me was how calm the governor sounded. Not angry, not loud, just firm, because that's what real authority looks like. It doesn't need theatrics, it doesn't need explosions, it doesn't need to shout to be heard. It just stands on the truth. It reminded me of something from my own community growing up. Those moments when someone finally tells a person who's pushing too hard, no, not here, not today. And seniors know that moment well. You've seen it in workplaces, churches, family gatherings, when someone who thinks they can steamroll the room finally realizes they've run into someone who won't bend. One governor even said, "Our guard is not a political tool." That line stayed with me because it cuts right to the heart of this crisis. Trump wasn't making a legitimate safety request. He was making a political one, and the states recognized it immediately. They've seen enough from him to know when a line is being crossed. And here's the part that should make every viewer sit up straight. When states and federal courts push back at the same time, it means the system is sending a message. A coordinated one, a rare one, the kind seniors have lived long enough to recognize. The kind that says we've reached the limit. Because when states refuse to hand over authority and judges refuse to rubber stamp overreach, the presidency doesn't look as powerful as Trump wants people to believe. But Trump didn't react with strategy or reflection. What he did next or didn't do spoke louder than any statement he could have made. What came next was one of the clearest signs I've seen in years that Trump's grip on power is slipping. Because instead of coming out swinging, instead of blasting the judge, instead of threatening appeals or firing off one of his marathon rants, he went quiet. Not strategic quiet, uncertain quiet. Now, seniors watching this, you know the difference. You've lived long enough to tell when someone is holding their tongue on purpose and when they just don't know what to say. And Trump, he didn't look calculated, he looked stunned, and that is rare. His public response was short, vague, almost rehearsed, like someone reading from a card they didn't write. No fire, no conviction, none of that chest-puffing bravado he leans on when he wants to project dominance. It was the kind of statement politicians release when they're trying not to confirm how shaken they are. And I kept thinking about this man I grew up around, a man who barked orders at everybody, always acting like he was in control. But the moment someone with real authority checked him, he'd get quiet. Eyes darting, breathing heavy like the air had shifted around him. Because that's what happens when someone finally meets a boundary they can't push through. That's exactly what Trump looked like. His advisors looked just as unsure. No coordinated messaging, no confident defenders making the rounds on cable news. Instead, the reactions felt scattered. Some tried to attack the judge, some avoided the topic entirely, and some shifted the conversation to unrelated issues. That's not a team executing a strategy. That's a team scrambling to protect a leader who doesn't know how to respond to being told no. And here's what seniors understand better than anyone. Silence can be the loudest alarm in the room. When someone who lives off attention suddenly has nothing to say, it means the moment exposed something they can't hide. Trump wasn't worried about losing a legal motion. He's lost those before. He was worried about what this ruling symbolized, a turning point where institutions weren't just resisting him, they were correcting him, and that realization hit him hard. But the meaning of all this for the country, for democracy, and for the future is where things get even clearer. What this moment revealed more than any press conference or rally speech is that Trump's power isn't what it used to be. Not in the courts, not in the states, not in the institutions that are supposed to withstand political storms. And seniors watching this, you know exactly how power fades. It's rarely a crash. It's a series of small slips, small cracks, small pushbacks that build until one day the person who thought they were untouchable realizes the room no longer moves when they walk in. This ruling wasn't just a legal check. It was a shift, a rebalancing, a reminder that the presidency is not a crown. It's a role with limits that must be respected. And the fact that governors and judges responded with the same quiet firmness tells me the country is tired of watching those limits be tested for sport. I spoke to a retired service member recently, a man in his 70s, who told me something that stuck with me. He said, "Jasmine, the military isn't supposed to be anybody's political weapon. The day a president treats it like one is the day the whole system starts to crack." And he said it with a seriousness that made me look at the ruling differently. Because for him, this wasn't about Trump. It was about safeguarding the country he served. And this is where seniors have such a unique perspective. You've seen presidents come and go. You've watched crises unfold. You've witnessed abuses of power in other nations and recognized the warning signs before younger generations even realize something is wrong. You know what it means when institutions stop bending to a leader and start reasserting themselves. That's why this ruling matters, because it signals something even Trump's supporters have to reckon with. A president cannot command the guard for personal or political reasons. Not now, not ever. And any attempt to do so will trigger the very resistance the founders built into this system. Trump may try to spin this moment, downplay it, or blame it on activist judges. But the truth is simpler than that. His power met a boundary and the boundary held. And what happens when a leader who lives off unchecked authority finally hits a wall? Seniors know the answer. The pressure mounts, the reactions grow unpredictable, and the stakes rise for everyone watching. So let's take a moment and talk about why this ruling should matter to you, not just to lawyers, not just to politicians, but to every senior watching this right now. Because what happened in that courtroom wasn't just a legal boundary being enforced. It was a reminder of something you've known your whole life. When someone in power gets told no, you pay attention to what they do next. Seniors understand this in a way younger folks don't. You've lived through leaders who overstepped. You've seen moments in history when emotions ran hotter than judgment. You've watched countries around the world slide into chaos when checks and balances stopped working or when citizens stopped caring whether they worked at all. And that's why this moment matters, because a president trying to influence the National Guard without proper cause isn't just a procedural issue, it's a signal. It tells you how they view authority. It tells you how far they're willing to push. It tells you whether the system's guardrails are still strong enough to protect ordinary people. I had a senior man in Fort Worth tell me last month, "Jasmine, I'm not worried about the noise anymore. I'm worried about the silence." And I knew exactly what he meant. It's not the loud statements that scare people. It's the moments when leaders try to move quietly, hoping nobody will notice what they're reaching for. This ruling forced the country to notice. And here's what I want you to reflect on. Has there ever been a time in your life when someone's reaction to being blocked told you more than the action itself? Maybe a boss, maybe a family member, maybe a community leader. How did they behave when their authority was challenged? Because that's what this whole moment with Trump is really about. Not the order, but the reaction. And the reaction exposed more than he wanted the world to see. And here's the truth I want to leave you with. This moment wasn't about legal jargon or political theater. It was about the strength of a system that still knows how to say enough. A judge stepped in. Governors stood firm. And for the first time in a long while, Trump felt the full weight of boundaries he could not bend. Seniors watching this, you know exactly how rare and important that is, because when power goes unchecked, people get hurt. When force becomes a shortcut, democracy becomes fragile. And when leaders start testing the edges of authority, it's the elders, the caregivers, the veterans, the everyday folks who feel the consequences first. That's why I keep speaking up, why I keep breaking this down, why I refuse to let moments like this slip by without calling them what they are. This wasn't just a blocked order. It was a warning, a reminder, a line in the sand. And I want to hear from you. Leave me a comment and tell me, do you think Trump crossed a line here? Do you think this was a misunderstanding of power or the beginning of something bigger he hoped nobody would notice? Your stories, your wisdom, your voices matter more than ever. Seniors built the backbone of this democracy, and then you deserve leaders who respect the systems that protect you. If this breakdown opened your eyes, hit like, share this with someone who needs the clarity, and make sure you're subscribed. We're building a community where truth isn't optional, it's the standard. Now, before you go, look to the left side of your screen. You see that video waiting for you. That one peels back a layer even deeper. A piece of this story that most people are still missing. Click that video on the left. Don't let it just stare at you. I'll meet you over there and we'll keep uncovering this together. All right.